Welcome to That Police Officer's channel. If you're new to the channel, here's what we do. As a police officer, I investigate some of the most unbelievable, cruel, and complex criminal cases, all from a law enforcement perspective. These are the stories that shake communities, challenge investigators, and remind us of the fragility of life. Today, we're going to talk about a case that gripped the nation. A case that shattered the peace of a small Texas town and left a family searching for answers no parent should ever have to seek. Our investigation today takes us to a town called Paradise. If you've never heard of it, it's a small town in Texas. A quiet, rural town where people look out for each other, where children can still ride their bikes down the street without fear. A place where the word danger is supposed to be a distant thought, not a reality lurking in the shadows. But on an ordinary afternoon, that illusion of safety was shattered. A little girl vanished from her own driveway, sparking a frantic search that would end in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. Today's case is about a 7-year-old child, Athena Strand. A bright, lively child with a big personality and an even bigger heart. She was the kind of little girl who loved her family, who adored animals, and who had an entire life ahead of her. Until, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. At first, it seemed like a simple case of a child wandering off. But as the hours stretched on and the search grew desperate, the truth became something far more troubling. This tragic incident all started with a delivery truck, a package left at the doorstep, and a crime that no one in Paradise, Texas, could have ever expected. What happened to Athena Strand? How did a routine delivery turn into a horrifying crime? And most importantly, who was responsible? Stay with me as we uncover the details of this heartbreaking case, step by step, from the moment Athena disappeared to the shocking revelation that sent waves of grief and outrage across the country. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel to never miss stories like this. On the afternoon of November 30th, 2022, 7-year-old Athena Strand went missing from her home in Paradise, Texas. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, a child playing outside, just steps from her front door. But within moments, everything changed. Her stepmother, the last person to see her, reported that Athena had been outside their home before she suddenly disappeared. At first, the assumption was that she had wandered off, possibly lost in the wooded areas surrounding the house. But as the minutes turned to hours, it became clear. This was not a case of a child simply losing her way. Something far more serious had happened. The family's home sat on a large piece of rural land, with open fields and scattered trees stretching around it. The remoteness of the property made the situation even more alarming. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, no immediate evidence of foul play. But a young child doesn't just vanish without a trace. Law enforcement was notified, and a search began immediately. First responders, deputies, and volunteers combed the area, calling her name, checking every possible hiding spot. Drones, K-9 units, and helicopters were deployed to assist in the search. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the urgency grew. A child alone in the elements was a dangerous scenario, but investigators were starting to suspect that Athena wasn't alone. Someone had taken her. The timeline of her disappearance was critical. The initial call came in around 6:40 p.m., but authorities believed she had been missing for over an hour by then. The delay in reporting, while understandable given the initial belief that she may have wandered off, meant that precious time had already been lost. And in cases like this, every second counts. Investigators worked quickly to rule out possible explanations. Could she have run away? Unlikely. She was just 7 years old, and there was nothing to suggest she had any reason to leave on her own. Could she have been taken by a wild animal? Again, unlikely. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks, no blood. That left one possibility that no one wanted to consider but had to. Athena had been abducted. As investigators spoke with family members and neighbors, one piece of information stood out. A delivery had been made to the house around the time Athena went missing. A small package had been left at the doorstep by a FedEx contract driver. an everyday occurrence in countless American neighborhoods. But this delivery was different. It wasn't just a routine drop-off. It marked the moment when innocence was stolen and a family's worst nightmare began. Authorities quickly identified the driver as Tanner Lynn Horner, a 31-year-old subcontractor working for FedEx. Surveillance footage and tracking data placed him at the residence during the crucial window of time. That alone wasn't enough to confirm involvement, but something about the timing raised red flags. With evidence mounting, law enforcement moved quickly. Horner was brought in for questioning, and what he revealed was something no investigator wanted to hear. He admitted to abducting Athena. Not only that, he confessed to killing her. This wasn't a long-planned crime. According to his own admission, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision, an opportunity that, in his mind, presented itself. And in the course of just a few minutes, he took an innocent child's life. Athena's body was later recovered about 6 miles from her home. The truth was devastating, not just for her family but for the entire community. A place that once felt safe would never be the same. This case wasn't just about one tragic event. It sparked conversations about safety, trust, and how easily the most unsuspecting people can commit the most unthinkable crimes. A routine delivery turned into an unthinkable nightmare. But the investigation was far from over. Law enforcement needed to ensure that every piece of evidence was collected, that justice would be served, and that this crime wouldn't be forgotten. Next, we'll take a deeper look into the investigation. How law enforcement connected the dots, the evidence that sealed the case, and the pursuit of justice for Athena Strand. From the moment we received the call about Athena Strand's disappearance, our priority was clear: locate her as quickly as possible. In cases involving missing children, time is the most critical factor. Every passing minute reduces the chances of finding them safe. Let me tell you one thing about police work. No matter the case, big or small, the first step is always the same: secure the scene. Before any questions can be answered, before any leads can be followed, we lock down the area, preserve evidence, and make sure nothing is overlooked. In a case like this, where every second counts, that first step can mean the difference between finding the truth and losing it forever. We treated Athena's home as a potential crime scene, even though, at the time, we didn't have confirmation of an abduction. Officers immediately began canvassing the area, speaking with neighbors, and searching every inch of the surrounding property. We needed to determine if Athena had simply wandered off or if something more sinister had occurred. Search teams were deployed, covering the heavily wooded areas near the house. Drones were sent up for aerial surveillance, and K-9 units were brought in to track any scent that might lead us to her. The problem? The property was large, the terrain uneven, and the cold night air made the search even more challenging. Despite hours of searching, there was no sign of Athena. At this point, we had to consider the possibility of an abduction. If someone had taken her, we needed to establish a timeline. The stepmother had last seen Athena around 5:30 p.m., but by the time the search began, more than an hour had passed. That was a significant gap, one that could mean the difference between finding her alive or arriving too late. We turned our attention to potential witnesses. Neighbors were questioned, but no one had seen anything unusual. The property was somewhat isolated, with only a few homes nearby. It was at this point that we got the information about the delivered package shortly before Athena disappeared. That delivery gave us a starting point. We reviewed the family's home security footage and confirmed that a FedEx driver had been at the house within the critical time frame. The package he delivered was still on the porch, untouched. Given the circumstances, we had to consider every possibility. Could he have seen something? Could he have been the last person to see Athena before she vanished? With that lead in hand, we tracked down the driver, Tanner Lynn Horner. He was a subcontracted FedEx driver, not a direct employee, which meant he likely had less oversight. When officers made contact with him, his demeanor immediately raised suspicion. He was nervous, avoiding direct eye contact, and gave conflicting statements about his route and deliveries that day. We brought Horner in for questioning. At first, he denied any involvement, But as we pressed him with inconsistencies in his story, his facade began to crack. Then came the moment that changed everything. Horner confessed. He admitted that he had abducted Athena. And then, he admitted something even worse. He had killed her. The room fell silent. No one wanted to believe what they had just heard, but as investigators, we had a job to do. We needed details. We needed to understand exactly what had happened, how it had happened, and where Athena was. Horner claimed that he had taken Athena in a moment of opportunity. According to his statement, he hadn't planned the crime, but when he saw her outside alone, he acted. He also claimed that after taking her, he panicked, afraid she would tell someone what had happened. His solution was unthinkable. With the confession in hand, our next priority was recovering Athena's body. Horner provided a location, a rural area about 6 miles from her home. A team was dispatched immediately. When they arrived, the heartbreaking confirmation came through. Athena was no longer missing. She had been murdered. The recovery was methodical. Every piece of evidence had to be documented. Forensic teams combed through the scene, searching for anything that could be used in court. The weight of the situation was heavy on all of us. It was the outcome we had feared, but one we had hoped we wouldn't have to face. With Athena's body recovered, the case now turned toward ensuring justice. Horner was charged with capital murder and aggravated kidnapping. The legal process would follow, but our job was not done. Investigators continued gathering evidence, interviewing anyone who had contact with Horner, and building the strongest case possible. This case was a reminder of how quickly a crime can unfold. A child, an ordinary day, and a predator who saw an opportunity. But it also reminded us of the importance of swift and thorough police work. Because of the dedication of every officer, investigator, and volunteer, we were able to bring closure to Athena's family, even if it wasn't the outcome we had hoped for. In the next section, we'll discuss the legal proceedings, the impact on the community, and what this case means for child safety moving forward. Once the investigation confirmed that Tanner Lynn Horner was responsible for Athena Strand's abduction and murder, the legal process began. The evidence was clear, and his confession left no room for doubt. But securing justice for Athena would be a long and emotional process, one that would test the patience and resilience of her family and the community. Horner was arrested and charged with capital murder and aggravated kidnapping. In Texas, capital murder is one of the most serious charges a person can face. It carries the possibility of life in prison without parole or even the death penalty. Given the circumstances of Athena's death, prosecutors were quick to indicate that they would pursue the maximum sentence. The court proceedings started with Horner's initial arraignment, where he formally heard the charges against him. He showed little emotion as the judge read out the accusations. His defense attorney requested no bond, which meant he would remain in custody until trial. There was no chance of him walking free while the case unfolded. For Athena's family, every court appearance was a painful reminder of what had been taken from them. Her mother and father sat in the courtroom, listening as prosecutors laid out the horrific details of their daughter's final moments. The evidence against Horner was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, GPS data from his delivery route, and his own confession made it clear that there was no mistake. He was guilty. The case never went to trial. With the weight of the evidence against him and the possibility of the death penalty looming, Horner opted to waive his right to a jury trial and instead pleaded guilty. There would be no drawn-out court battle, no need for Athena's family to relive the nightmare in front of a courtroom filled with spectators. However, even with a guilty plea, the sentencing phase would determine his final punishment. During the sentencing hearing, Athena's family had the chance to speak. Their words were powerful, filled with grief, anger, and the desperate wish that their little girl was still alive. Her mother spoke directly to Horner, telling him about the pain he had caused, the empty space he had left in their family. There wasn't a single person in that courtroom who wasn't affected by their words. In the end, the court handed down the harshest sentence possible. Tanner Lynn Horner was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge made it clear that he would never walk free again. For Athena's family, it wasn't justice in the sense that it could bring her back, but it was accountability. They would never have to worry about him hurting another child again. This case had a ripple effect beyond the courtroom. It led to discussions about delivery driver screening processes and how easily individuals with no prior connection to a family can gain access to their homes. Companies faced scrutiny about their hiring policies, and safety advocates pushed for better protections for children. Athena's story is now a painful reminder of how quickly tragedy can strike. Her family continues to keep her memory alive, advocating for stronger laws and greater awareness. Her community, once a quiet and peaceful town, will never forget the little girl who was taken too soon. In the next section, we'll reflect on the lessons learned from this case and what steps can be taken to prevent tragedies like this in the future. As officers, we see the worst of humanity far too often, but when the victim is a child, when innocence is taken in such a cruel way, it hits differently. It reminds us why we do this job, why we pursue justice relentlessly, and why we must always remain vigilant. Athena Strand should have had a lifetime ahead of her. She should have been able to grow up, chase her dreams, and live a life free from harm. Instead, her story became a warning, a tragic reminder of the dangers that can lurk where we least expect them. Her family will never be the same. No amount of legal punishment can undo what was done. A guilty plea, a life sentence. It may bring some sense of closure, but it can never bring back what was lost. The pain remains, the absence is permanent, and the questions of why and what if will always linger. For the people of Paradise, Texas, this case shattered the illusion of safety in their small town. It made parents hold their children a little tighter and reconsider the trust they place in strangers. It forced conversations about security, about background checks, about the responsibilities of companies that send workers into homes and neighborhoods. For law enforcement, this case was a reminder of the importance of acting fast, following every lead, and trusting instincts. Every decision made in those critical first hours shaped the outcome of the investigation. The swift work of officers, investigators, and forensic teams ensured that Athena's killer was caught before he could hurt anyone else. But even with justice served, the reality remains. No child should ever be taken like this. No family should have to endure this kind of loss. The world can be unpredictable, and danger can come from unexpected places. Cases like this force us to ask ourselves, are we doing enough to protect the most vulnerable among us? As officers, we carry these cases with us. We don't forget the names, the faces, or the families left behind. Athena Strand's story is one we will remember. And while we can't change what happened, we can honor her memory by learning from it, by staying vigilant, by demanding better protections for our children, and by ensuring that those who commit these crimes are held accountable. Thank you for joining me on this case. If you found this investigation insightful, consider subscribing to the channel for more in-depth law enforcement perspectives on true crime. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, justice is not just about solving cases. It's about making sure tragedies like this don't happen again.